Hello and welcome to this tutorial. We're going to show you how to configure and verify EtherChannel. Now, you might remember we have two methods to do this. The first one is the Cisco proprietary method and the other is the I3E standard. In this tutorial we'll show you how to create EtherChannel using the Cisco method. Now before we jump onto the switches, let's go ahead and take an overview of what we're actually going to do. We have two switches set up and there are two links between them. And these two links are going to be put into our EtherChannel. But keep in mind, you can have up to a total of 8 interfaces in an EtherChannel. Now the first thing we're going to do is enter some interface subcommands on each of the links that we want to put into the EtherChannel. And by doing this, a new virtual interface is going to be created. And you might remember again that this virtual interface is used to represent the entire EtherChannel. Now this interface is commonly called a port channel, and it's actually going to be listed that way in the list of interfaces on the switch. And we'll see this in just a minute. Now sometimes this bundle of links is referred to as an EtherChannel, and sometimes it's referred to as a port channel. Don't get confused, they're referring to the same thing. A few things to keep in mind. You should have the same number of interfaces in your EtherChannel on both switches, and you should also use the same method to create the EtherChannel on both switches. What I mean by that is, if you use the Cisco method on one switch and you use the I3E on the other, they're not going to work together. You will not create an EtherChannel. So it has to be the same on both switches. Also, when we create our virtual interface, it's going to have a number associated with it, just like every interface has a number of some kind associated with it. And even though the interface is created automatically for us, we actually choose the interface number. And we'll show you how to do that. Okay, so that's our approach. So let's go ahead and do it. Now we are on switch A. Switch B has already been configured for us, so if we do this properly, we should have an EtherChannel. We are going to put interfaces FA023 and FA024 into our EtherChannel, and here's the configuration of 23. 24 is exactly the same. So we'll start off, we go into configuration mode, and sometimes you may be configuring 8 interfaces, the maximum allowed. Either way, I always recommend using the interface range command, because here you can configure all of your interfaces at once, and that's important because you want them to be the same. So the command we want to look at is the channel group command. But before you enter that, I recommend shutting down the interfaces that you're going to configure first, and then go ahead and begin using the channel group command. So the first parameter we come across in the channel group command is a number, and this is the number of the virtual interface that we talked about. Next, we have to specify a mode, and this means how do we want these ports to behave in order to become an EtherChannel. And let's look at some of our options. With PAgP, we have 3 options available to us: on, auto, and desirable. And this conversation is going to sound very familiar to the dynamic trunking protocol conversation, and you'll see why. If we want these ports to always act as an EtherChannel, then we choose the on parameter. If we want them to negotiate but they don't take the first step, the other side has to initiate that negotiation, then we choose the auto parameter. And then finally, if we want them to negotiate and take the first step to actually initiate that negotiation, then we choose desirable. So that's why this is very similar to dynamic trunking protocol. You have some options there of to negotiate or not. For us, we're not going to negotiate. We want these to always be an EtherChannel. We issue that command and we immediately get some feedback from the switch. Creating a port channel interface, port channel 10. Okay, well that's what we talked about. The switch would go ahead and create a virtual interface for us immediately upon entering those commands. So now, let's take a look at our list of interfaces. I'll scroll all the way down to the bottom, and you can see port channel 10 has been created. That's great. Now we need to go ahead and turn up FA023 and FA024. We can do that individually, or we can use the range command again. And in fact, we're already in the range. So let's do the no shut and take a look at our list of interfaces again. And now you can see the port channel's up and our 2 member interfaces are up. Well, it looks like we've just created an Ether channel. But let's get some more information about this Ether channel we just created. If I just logged onto this switch, I didn't know anything about the Ether channel, the one command I could issue is show Ether channel summary. And this would list every Ether channel we have configured. Since we only have one listed. It tells you the number, and on the right hand side it tells you the member interfaces, and that's really key. You can quickly determine which interfaces are members of this group. And of course it tells you the port channel number, P010. Okay, so the show Ether channel summary command is very useful. We can also then take a look at spanning tree, because once we created that Ether channel between the 2 switches, spanning tree would use the Ether channel logical interface, which is P010, as opposed to the individual interfaces. So let's take a look at the root for all our spanning trees. And here you can see, since switch B is the root switch for all of these VLANs, instead of listing FA023 or FA024, it's now listing P010, which is port channel 10. Okay? Alright, well let's summarize what we covered. If we're going to create an Ether channel, we can either use PAgP or the I3E method, but you can't use them both together. So both sides have to use the same method. And we know we can put a total of 8 member interfaces into an Ether channel, and we have to configure each interface, and they all get configured exactly the same. Now the command we used was the channel group mode command, and that's where we specify the group number and also how we want those interfaces to behave. And remember those options, the on, auto, and desirable. It may get a little confusing if you are keeping those in mind along with the dynamic trunking mode parameters, but do your best to distinguish the two. It's important to know these. And then finally, when we want to verify our work, we can use the show Ether channel summary command, which is extremely useful. It lists all of the Ether channels and the member interfaces and their status. And then of course we confirmed our Ether channel was working along with spanning tree, because spanning tree now was using the virtual interface between the 2 switches and not the individual interfaces. Also, none of those interfaces, FA023 and FA024, were in a blocking state. And that was good. Okay, and so that's it. That is how you configure Ether channel and verify it. Thanks for watching.